everyone is aware of this so that the presentations can be shared afterwards. So we're going to start with an introduction to the topic, setting the scene. Then we're going to move on to presentation of key insights and recommendations from the brief itself. Then we will move to a series of short reflections from different perspectives. The topic today is very multidimensional. We're going to look at different connections between WASH and animals from different perspectives. So we'll have some of those perspectives shared today from different organizations you can see here in the program. Then we will have a bit of time towards the end for questions and answers. Feel free to put questions or comments in the chat window as we go. Then I'll aim to collect them at the end, or you can save your questions for the end as well. But feel free to put anything there. If you would like to introduce yourself as well, feel free to use the chat for that purpose. And then I'll close the webinar. So with that, we have a fairly short time frames for today. So I'd like to pass it over to our first speaker who's going to set the scene. Alice Brandt, who is an advisor to the Secretariat for the International Alliance Against Health Risks in Wildlife Trade at the German Development Cooperation. So over to you, Alice.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction. And hello, everyone, again. I'm very happy to set the scene today to a topic or an integration of topics that is very close to my heart, because I have previously started my career in GIZ working in WASH, and then I moved on to a project in One Health, and I currently work in pandemic prevention through wildlife health. So the integration of animals into WASH and the policy brief that we will discuss today is something very important to me. And I would like to set the scene by sharing briefly my experiences when I was working on One Health in Guatemala. I would usually accompany our implementation partners, such as the Wildlife Conservation Society, in field trips and to do some field work, for instance, in rural indigenous villages, where our project was set on the northern part of Guatemala in a forest. And those villages all had in common that there were pigs and cows and chicken and dogs and horses all roaming and going about their business without any fences separating the species, and not even having fences around the houses. So you can imagine that in a rural village, there are huts, and then there's the outside area that is usually used for cooking, preparing food, handling meat, washing hands, washing clothes, and washing the food items, without any fences, meaning that chicken and pigs would also be walking around that area. And the floor would be dusty and sandy, which some of you might know is very difficult to clean. So in the area where there would be the washing station and the food preparation would also be animal feces all over. Furthermore, we noticed that in that specific area where we went, there was a very common knowledge that if you want to treat a sick animal, a bigger animal such as a cow or a horse, the people would add a sort of sauce to the drinking water of that livestock, believing it was, in Guatemala, it's a sauce called salsa inglesa. So I don't know how many of you are from the continent. They might know it's some sort of barbecue sauce. So for some reason, we didn't know, not even the veterinarians from the Wildlife Conservation Society knew, why there was this misconception that you can treat livestock by adding the sauce to the drinking water. And when we further asked if the villagers would have noticed or observed any contact with the surrounding wildlife and some health risks coming from that, the common assumption would be, for instance, that wildlife such as bats or tapirs cannot possibly have sickness or illness in them because they are from nature, and everything that comes from nature is pure. So I'm just like sharing this experience with you because, in my opinion, this is a very like textbook kind of example of where a One Health and WASH intervention would be strongly needed. So I'm really hoping that the policy brief that we are discussing today might get translated into Spanish, and that our like bilateral cooperation projects in the region can use this policy brief to translate it to our partners, because the animal, wildlife, human interface in like regards of health is in a very, very dire situation over there. So the policy brief that we're looking at today is based on discussions from last year's World Water Week. And it was noted that WASH strategies very often overlook this very crucial interaction between humans and animals, which leads to gaps in effectiveness and inclusivity. And I myself remember that when I was working in WASH, we never mentioned the animal realm. Such as animal fecal hazards, but also on the other hand, coming now from the wildlife health perspective, WASH aspects are very rarely addressed. For instance, super important, hand hygiene when handling bushmeat, which is a major source of protein in many areas of low and middle income countries, or when engaging with wildlife in trading situations such as wet markets. There is no hand hygiene station, but it really should be. Also, we have seen that recent pandemics such as Ebola and COVID-19 have like shown to our generation that diseases in animals can spread very, very quickly to humans and vice versa. And if we don't have adequate like access to adequate sanitation, it can just worsen the situation and the diseases will spread further. What I would like to highlight in my last minute, then I'm done, are two aspects that I did not see included in the policy brief, coming, as I mentioned, from the wildlife health perspective. I think it's very important to frame the issue correctly, that animals and wildlife are not the problem. It's dangerous to frame it in a way that at the heart of human-animal conflict over resources, for instance, it's not the animals that are the issue. It's management of the resources, which is the problem, and it's human activity. And the way too close interfaces between humans and animals and wildlife that pose the problem. And the second thing that I would like to highlight is that we need to be wary about differing. There's animals, domestic animals, livestock, pets, and then there's wildlife. And when we look at wildlife, there are the animals in nature, and then there are the breeding farms and facilities that have a way higher risk of spillover events of zoonotic diseases to humans than the lonely jaguar that is just living in its natural habitat. So these are the two aspects that I wanted to highlight, which I've done. So without further ado, I suggest we continue on this path and get into the discussions. And I really hope that this policy brief and this event is only the beginning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alice, for setting the scene and also highlighting some interesting perspectives as well from your own experience. So now we're going to move to Hélène Ledemphe, and she's actually been leading this work and putting together the policy brief. I noticed that she's just commented in the chat here for everyone who would like to read the brief. The information is there. And just for those of you that joined late, the webinar today is not just about this topic of putting animals in the WASH agenda, it's also launch of this very exciting policy brief. So now I'd like to pass it over to Hélène to talk about some of the key insights and recommendations from the brief.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I hope you can hear me okay. So like many recent initiatives in our complicated world, this publication that we are releasing today may seem like a curious beast. Why should WASH professionals be more interested in animals in their working environment? Isn't WASH primarily a human issue about delivering services to people and human rights to water and sanitation? Well, actually, in this policy brief, the point we make is what our previous speaker already said. The point we make is that human health and hygiene and human rights to water and sanitation and the link between water and development are also an animal issue. So as Andrew Pendergast and colleagues described in 2019, with this document, we aim to put the long missing A into WASH, and this A stands for animals. The policy brief emerges at a time when the WASH sector increasingly recognizes the multi-layered nature of WASH services and the multi-layered nature of its failures. Because we all know that it takes much more than pipes to deliver water, sanitation, and health. It takes a whole system of water sources, of people, and infrastructure. So animals are an integral part of these WASH systems, and it is high time that we take a serious look at how these animal lives influence our drinking water, our sanitation solutions, and our hygienic conditions, but also the implications of those systems on other animals' lives. Too often, the WASH sector has focused narrowly on the first element in this diagram that you see on your screen. It's human components. In this core element of the WASH business, a few technical and behavioral shortcomings are used to justify a limited set of interventions at the household or community level. So water supply, and quality, you have human sanitation, personal and domestic hygiene, and menstrual hygiene management. But putting the spotlight on animals is the second circle in this diagram. It helps lift our eyes and goes beyond isolated problem. It brings WASH into context. And animal and environmental sanitation approaches focus on animal impacts on WASH outcomes, and they conceive other animals as mainly as threats to public health. So interventions aim at disease control and prevention. So at this level, you can address issues such as stagnant water and mosquito breeding, for instance, or the relationship between the disposal or runoff of animal excreta and antimicrobial resistance. So animal inclusive approaches help design a more effective approach to interventions across many known and suspected causes of service failure. But animals are not only constraints to WASH. This is the third circle in this diagram. Animals contribute actually to the functioning of WASH systems. We share common water sources, and animal presence and their needs shape the broader water security environment for communities, and they influence the sustainability of services. Think about the water that is carted by donkeys, for instance. And animals also matter to the resilience of human lives for livestock-dependent communities. So what this policy brief advocates is for integrated interventions that include all those animal lives and all those roles that they play in people's lives that were not considered previously as part of the core business of water sanitation and hygiene. So as we heard, the document is the result of a conversation that started at World Water Week last year in Stockholm. And during this seminar and the conversation that followed, we discovered that there is much to learn from existing approaches that take seriously the multiple dimensions of animals' roles in WASH. And this diagram shows you 6 of that kind of integrated approaches that consider animals as integral parts of WASH problem space. If we go through this diagram very briefly, we see that we start with the health, interventions to improve health for humans animals and water are such an integrated approach. And there you recognize the efforts to make One Health part of WASH and WASH part of One Health integration interventions. Second, you have the programs that tackle the problematic and generative interrelations between animals and water in food production systems. And this aspect, as we all know, is capital for the quality of water and the quantities of water that are available to wash supply, but also for the control of AMR, the antimicrobial resistance. Third, we have the links between WASH and biodiversity conservation, and these are WASH in watershed interventions, which factor in the impacts of inadequate sanitation facilities on ecosystems, but also the contribution of biodiversity to the resilience of WASH services. Fourth, you have the importance of including the dimension of animal welfare, and particularly the animal water welfare of animals in WASH programming. And this is the case of the many communities dependent on animals' work for their supply of clean drinking water. Donkeys, again, and the horses carting potable waters are a good example. And finally, there's two elements. Animals and their carers are also key stakeholders in WASH for peace. For instance, in human-wildlife conflicts and herder-farmer conflicts, but also in WASH interventions across the humanitarian development nexus, including, for instance, the resilience of livestock-dependent communities who must cope with droughts and floods and forced displacement. So the policy brief draws all these fields together and draws three broad lessons from this conversation. The first of all, WASH programs applied simultaneously to human and animal populations are likely to provide more sustainable results than those that are centered only on humans. And we will hear striking examples illustrating this point from our speakers today. Second, including animals in WASH programs is a powerful way to see service delivery as a system, and a system where clean water and safe sanitation contributes well beyond SDG 6. That is, animal inclusive WASH helps achieve targets across SDGs, such as those you see in the list on the right-hand side of your screen. And this is all detailed in the policy brief. And third lesson is that the various integrated approaches that we have brought together, they themselves need to speak to each other. They need to connect with one another. For instance, how does integrating WASH and One Health contribute to peace and humanitarian and development nexus, for instance? Or how can watershed WASH approaches be more conflict informed? So sorry, I'm lost in my papers, of course, but we draw three lessons from these discussions, and these are the recommendations that we give to policymakers, to WASH practitioners, and to researchers. And those three lessons are about expanding the WASH toolbox, about the fact that multi-sectoral cooperation is key, and building the evidence base for action. Why would you expand the WASH toolbox? Well, it's of course because we need to work with new definitions and expand our methods. For instance, take WASH community. If you define it only as a human community, you will miss a lot. So you need to expand the definition of a WASH community beyond its human members, because the environment of water and sanitation services sometimes includes chicken, as we heard, and livestock are also water users. So animals are here to stay. And in some contexts, we need to ask ourselves whether a strict separation between animals and humans is even feasible, and if it's only the only solution. We need also to expand the way we think about human right to water. It has to be understood beyond its use for drinking water. As WASH professionals, we need to give more visibility in policy, programming, and interventions to immediate domestic and cultural needs for water in which animals play a role. Another way to expand the WASH toolbox is to rethink the way we see infrastructure. Of course, we know that infrastructures are about hard hardware and software and orgware, the organizational technologies. But to this list, we may have to add the living infrastructure, all those working animals who process our wastewater and those who provide access to clean water. And we also need to add new voices and new stakeholders to our consultations. WASH institutions and WASH professionals need to actively engage animal caretakers, and in particular women, and people with a knowledge of animals in the process of researching, designing, and monitoring WASH interventions. And including animals also questions the way we measure WASH systems, WASH success. We need to create new criteria to design, monitor, and evaluate WASH interventions. We must also measure the well-being of ecosystems. We must measure the well-being of livestock and of multi-species communities and populations in our working environment. And so, second point, the multi-sectoral cooperation is quite clear. The new working directions of animal inclusive WASH requires that we work together with new people, work in multidisciplinary teams and with multidisciplinary methods, and that we collaborate across sectors with health and agriculture, etc. And finally, building the evidence bank of what works is important, because the evidence for the integration of animals and water and sanitation is overwhelming. The question now is what to do about it. So practitioners and researchers need to document results and build the evidence base, showing how different policies and different interventions work to improve WASH outcomes and contribute to achieving results for animals, for water ecosystems, and for people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that overview. I realized I may have forgotten to introduce you previously. So for everyone who doesn't know Helen Nadef is Program Manager at the Stockholm International Water Institute, or SIWI. So thank you so much for piquing our interest on the brief. And as I mentioned earlier, you have the link there to read it later. Now we're going to move on to several interventions that are going to reflect on the brief and the topic today, putting animals in the WASH agenda from different perspectives. So we're going to start first with Dr. Michelle Dion, who is a senior scientist within the Animal Health Group in the Animal and Human Health Program at the International Livestock Research Institute, or ILRI. So now I'll pass it over to you, Michelle. Please go ahead. You're muted, Michelle.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, do you hear me now?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so thank you, Sarah, and the whole team for giving me this opportunity again to reflect on this policy brief you have worked together. I will talk from a field perspective, because I've been involved in many WASH-related programs in a rural area in West Africa. These pictures I'm showing here are from rural Mali, where, as you see, the setting of the livestock systems, where we cannot put a line between the livestock and then the human. Down there, you see a woman with a child milking a small ruminant for own consumption. A man here who has just slaughtered a small ruminant. It's a goat for home consumption, and see the child walking around on the soil, interacting with the animals. So this is just to say that the production system, livestock production system we have in most of sub-Saharan countries is very prone to close contact between animals and humans. And this is part of the life of the communities. This is part of the social construction of the system. And then WASH intervention that include a focus on animals and their waste will obviously benefit people and animals. So in the next slide, I will focus on 4 key recommendations that are already, most of them, in the brief, but I have just selected those based on my own experience in the field. Next. the first point I wanted to emphasize here is that a good understanding of the roles of livestock and their relationship with the communities is a must for sustainable interventions. So we know that livestock play many multiple roles for the communities beyond only food security, social stabilization of the communities, and many other environmental roles. So knowing and understanding their roles and the relationship with the communities will help us phrase a very more sustainable intervention. And the next point is that interventions should also be co-created with the communities. So it should not be a top-down approach. It should be co-created with communities and should fit the local context. And the third point is that we should deliberately give importance to women and children, because if you look at the livestock settings, women and children are the most exposed to the risk in the household, because they are always at home and then they are more involved at the production node of the livestock. So overlooking women will also undermine our intervention if we want to tackle WASH in the communities. And finally, as you all agree that the One Health perspective should go only beyond the biophysical pathway of One Health, like looking at just the pathogen, but also considering the whole well-being of the communities and the animals, putting into action the food security, the social capital, the public health, and then the welfare of the animals and the communities. I'm saying that because now more and more we push for intervention that increase productivity of the community at the same time, so regarding welfare and public health. So we should not only focus on just tackling WASH issues, but at the same time we build the resilience of the communities to be able to have access to clean water, to be able to have access to all the input to the farm for the animals, so that they are safe themselves, they are food secure, and also they can have good return on their animals. So these were the 4 points I wanted to emphasize here in this, and I think most of them are already included in the policy brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dion, for highlighting those perspectives and the importance of appropriate programs or activities. Now we're going to move over to Mr. Barato Ruhiza, who is a Senior Land and Water Officer within the Land and Water Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization. So over to you, Mr. Ruhiza.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at the launch of this policy brief. And when Alice started talking at the beginning, she got me into the core of my being, because I'm a villager. If I think about my childhood, the hut where I used to live with my grandmother when I go to the village, we'll have our one cow to the right, a chicken and goat at the back of the hut, and we'll make our fire inside the house. My hands here, I can handle cow dung without any hesitation, for fire, for energy, or as manure, or for painting walls. It's part and parcel of my existence. So much so that when I married my wife, I had to give what we call in Southern Africa lobola, 2 cows. Yeah, I had to give 2 cows as dowry, and my father-in-law collected those cows. I own a number of cows, a number of goats on my farm in the village. So the launch of this this policy brief is really, I think, a step forward. When I reflect on the challenges that this world is facing, it's really a step forward, as it has been said, towards an integrated approach that is becoming inevitable in the wake of pressures that natural resources, water being one of them, are facing. And if we don't work in collaboration and integrated approach, then the future of the planet and of its inhabitants, human beings and animals alike, is a danger. These pressures include climate change, population growth, and our changing lifestyles that are more and more wasteful. And in this context, for us at FAO, with our mandate focusing on food security, we aim to achieve better production, better environment, better nutrition, and better life, leaving no one behind. And livestock and animals in general, cattle, goats, camels, poultry, rabbits, donkeys, are an integral part of the solution and sometimes of the problem in this competition for natural resources. And now with specific regard to natural resources, and the policy brief does mention it, animals do compete for the resource, and they affect water resources in many ways, pollution leading to AMR, zoonotic hosts, vectors of various infectious pathogens, etc. But as it has also been said, they play a role in healthy ecosystems. They can even provide bioenergy for improving the water treatment, even at household level. They can be used to carry water from points of abundance to points of scarcity where there is demand. It has also been mentioned. So they can contribute, animals in general, they can contribute to the achievement of several SDGs. SDG 6 is the focus of today's talk on clean water and sanitation. But as it has been mentioned also by Helen, to ending poverty, and whoever ends poverty then provides the means to reach many other SDGs, such as affording good health, good education, gender equity, and so forth. But for us in FAO, of course, our mandate focuses on zero hunger, which is directly linked to what we do. So we see this policy brief as the start of an exciting journey where we are all compelled to collaborate. And livestock and animals need to be considered as a multidimensional opportunity. It is a key role player in water, sanitation, and hygiene in a complex context which calls all of us to maximize the benefits for today and for future generations. Again, when I go back to where I started, to my village, and to many other parts of the world, we can speak of WASH if we have access to water and sanitation. I am ashamed to say that despite being a water engineer, I fight to ensure sustainable access to water in my village. Last year, in February, I went up to the mountains to improve the supply of water, to increase the water sources that we can capture, to bring water to my community. And yesterday, as I was getting feedback, I was told that the whole infrastructure has collapsed again and people are not responsible. My parish is not getting water. My own house is not getting water. And it's really very painful. And I feel like a failed water resource professional because I have not been able to do that. So I feel the opportunity that this policy brief offers is to learn from the lessons of where WASH has been implemented so that in the future, when we are implementing WASH projects, we do take this integrated approach that does consider the critical and the positive role that livestock and animals have to play. And I think our future collaboration will go into that direction. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruiza, for that perspective and highlighting the integrated and complex role of animals when it comes to WASH. I think our next speaker is also going to highlight a very interesting topic for some of us in the WASH sector who don't think so much about these issues around animal welfare. So I'm going to pass it over to Sandra Zafra, who is a public affairs officer at the World Horse Welfare, which is part of the Working Animal Alliance. So over to you, Sandra, for your perspective.
Thank you very much. So yeah, first of all, if we move to the next slide, I would like to share a short video that was taken last year in Senegal, as it is one of the project countries from World Horse Welfare. So if you can start. Thank you. So some team members literally drove for days through the barren lands of the Senegalese desert with a transhumane community, so a nomad community. These communities undertake these long journeys, daily facing hot, dusty conditions in areas, in very remote areas with very poor access to shade. And the working equids that come with them perform an otherwise impossible task to access the water. So as we have seen the containers, sorry, I think the video here. So when the containers are filled with the water, it will be the donkeys or other equids, horses, that will pull these more than 1,000 kilos of water and will transport them. So the members of the families, community, also the livestock that are traveling with them, and the working equids, so these horses, donkeys, or mules can have access to clean and drinkable water and get hydrated. So after a short time with these communities, we could see how dependent they are on their working equids, especially on their access to their collection to water. However, most of the times these animals are invisible and are not often included in policies related to WASH or other water policies. And it's imperative that this connection between the working animals and access to water and water security is recognized. As some of the previous speakers said, these animals are not always part of the problem, but sometimes are part of the solution to grant access to water. Next slide, please. So we very much welcome this policy briefing and the recommendations within it, some of which have been already been mentioned in this meeting. So if we go to the next slide, from our perspective, one of the most important recommendations is this need to integrate the WASH with the animal perspective or animal related strategies, and also with other sectors. So the first step is by reviewing the WASH and water policies and integrate the animal perspective into this. And then for the WASH programs to be integrated in other national policies, for instance, related to economic development, biodiversity, environment, climate change adaptation, agriculture and food security, and many others. But also in many contexts, it has been so that the presence of these of livestock or animals in domestic environments entail health risks, for instance, related to zoonosis and so on. So it's very important to integrate or apply the One Health perspective or approach when talking about WASH, and combine the veterinary, human, and water health approaches, which are very much interconnected when we discuss about these issues. Next slide, please. Thanks. And then yes, one of the many relevant recommendations is the need to protect the welfare of the animals, especially the ones involved in the water supply systems. For instance, by implementing the World Organization for Animal Health standards, so the chapter on the welfare of working equids, but also by implementing standards streamlining the livestock welfare in emergency WASH interventions. So again, trying to feed the animal perspective into these interventions. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I will finish my presentation to stressing the importance to recognize the role that these working animals play towards water security, and something that has been mentioned, the need to for stakeholders from WASH practitioners to policymakers, researchers, NGOs to collaborate and to work together to achieve more efficient solutions to water issues and to left no one behind.
Thank you very much, Ms. Safra, for that perspective and very interesting, I think, connection to this multi-species idea that's in the brief and how we can actually go about thinking about that in practice. So now I'd like to pass it over to our last speaker today, Lena Stegerskog, who is representing the Sweden International Agriculture Network Initiative, or SIANI, at the Stockholm Environment Institute. So over to you, Linus.
Thank you, Sarah. I can take the next, that one. So from this brief, I'd like to pick up more on the WASH and One Health links. And as you know, One Health is an approach to balance and optimize human, animal, and ecosystem health, as these dimensions are closely linked and interdependent. So how does WASH fit into this One Health concept? Recently at SCI, we had some funds to run a WASH and One Health network with researchers from Sweden, Burkina Faso, Mozambique, and Kenya. And the figure is how we conceptualized WASH from a One Health perspective. So the blue arrow is meant to symbolize conventional WASH, focusing on supplying water to humans and reducing exposure to human excreta, but not really paying that much attention to interactions with animals or the effect on the environment. So however, from a WASH and One Health perspective, we would consider also the interaction between animals and humans, and the second arrow, and work to reduce zoonosis, especially in rural communities where humans and livestock live close together. And in addition, sanitation of both animal and human excreta could impact ecosystem health. The arrow 3 and 4, there are huge quantities of nutrients and organic matter in livestock and human excreta that can damage aquatic ecosystems if discharged, but can also enhance agricultural sustainability if reused safely. So I'll focus a bit more on the links to environmental health in this presentation. So next slide. So essentially, I'd say like livestock and humans have very similar needs and we function very similarly. We eat and we excrete. So plant nutrients are removed from agricultural land with food and fodder, and very little of these nutrients actually retained in humans and livestock. So we can call ourselves nutrient pumps, eating, excreting, eating, excreting, eating, excreting. And literature shows that over a lifetime, less than 1% of the ingested nutrients in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, etc., end up in the human body, and 99% will be excreted over a lifetime. And for production livestock, the global values are 9% retained for pork, pigs, and 20% for poultry, and roughly 4% for cattle. So how we handle the excreta is crucial both for environment and for agriculture. If you click, Bettina. So either we create problems for aquatic ecosystems. Currently, we have 500 dead zones around the world, and they're doubling every 10 years. Or we recycle the resources safely and sustain production. And to show the importance of increased and improved human and livestock excreta recycling, I'll take global nitrogen management as an example. So next slide, please. So the bar in this graph, the bar to the left shows how much nitrogen we actually introduce into the biosphere in modern farming each year. So roughly 109 million tons of chemical fertilizers and another 30 to 70 million tons of nitrogen fixing crops. So in total, roughly 150 million tons of nitrogen is introduced into the biosphere every year in agriculture. But the planetary boundary framework has set the limit to roughly 60 tons per year of nitrogen, of new nitrogen, to avoid great and harmful impact on global ecosystems, especially aquatic ecosystems. And that's represented by the red bar. So to get down to the red bar, we need to more than half the input of new nitrogen into ecosystems. And some room of improvement is through better use of nitrogen in agriculture. That the nitrogen applied is actually taken up by plants. Roughly, it's a bit below 50% of nitrogen applied that's taken up, and it could be possible to get to 60–70%. but we definitely need to recycle back as much as possible of the nitrogen taken out with fodder and fodder and food. And the second bar is livestock grazing. There's not much to do there. That's recycled automatically when livestock deposit their excreta on the pasture. But the third and fourth bar is where we can actually make a difference. That's the nitrogen we can manage in terms of livestock excreta and human excreta. And this is not new nitrogen. This is nitrogen that we keep in the loop. So it's called good nitrogen to keep in the loop. And FAO estimates that roughly 65% of livestock excreta, nitrogen in livestock excreta, is actually recycled back, and the rest is lost in storage. There is no good estimates what is actually recycled back in human excreta today, but 10 to 30% are figures I read, and the rest is taxing the environment. So in total, we could, by optimizing livestock and human excreta, maybe get another 40 million ton of nitrogen back and reduce the need of new nitrogen. And this has to be done systematically, and WASH and agriculture will need to work closely together, and all over the world, in rich and poor countries, and especially but this has also implications when we, especially in smallholder farming, where the dependence on scarce resources is high. And next slide. So in practice, what would it imply? And I think the SIWI brief also talks about the importance of environmental sanitation approaches. And the SCI, together with WaterAid in Burkina Faso, has been developing and working on an approach we call the Clean and Green framework, aiming for integrated management of risks and resources from local wastes and residues. And these photos show typical situation in rural Burkina Faso with human excreta. That's either open defecation or rudimentary pit latrines. There's a lot of animal excreta to manage. There's grey water, there's organic waste, there's ash. And in the Clean and Green, we map out these risks and resources in a participatory way and work together to improve health and agricultural production. And the last slide would be, there's no time to get into details, but we have spent quite a lot of time to develop the framework and tools for implementation. And there is some pilot experience, mainly from 2 villages, that we have documented. And there are some reports available on the website. Some conclusion is that these systems approaches, they are very demanding, but also very rewarding. And the shift from focusing on a technology to actually managing resources and risks is also an innovation, I'd say. The field trials of waste recycling is important, and working together with ag people. And we would need more and longer piloting for impact evaluation, and very much open to collaborations to adapt the framework and to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linus. I think thank you to all the speakers for really expanding our perspective on these issues. I think you can see that this is a very rich topic, and there's much to dig into across all these different perspectives. So we will have a bit of time for questions. You're welcome to put the questions for any of the speakers or for just general comments in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to say something, turn on your mic. Are there any immediate questions? I'd like to maybe start with a question for all the speakers about, I noticed with this topic, there are many tensions and potential winners and losers. So how can we ensure that we are promoting an equitable approach? And this, of course, is going beyond just for humans, but thinking about this from the broader perspective that you've presented, how can we ensure when there's these kind of different perspectives that we're not sort of by accident promoting some kind of inequality by focusing on one aspect? That was to anyone of the speakers who'd like to comment. Sandra, do you like to go? And Helen, you're muted if you were saying something.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So on your question, I would think that we have been discussing that. I think it's having these conversations and having the different, the views from different approaches and understand what are the issues that different stakeholders are facing in their daily work, and trying to pull them together and see if there are common solutions that might be that to solve one issue you might need to see it from a different approach, and maybe addressing things collaboratively could be a good way to improve the lives of all the humans and animals and environment, and improve the conditions that are all surrounding these issues. So for me, collaboration, having the discussions, understanding that this is an interconnected topic, that we cannot address it in isolation, and we are having the bigger picture is also very useful to find other solutions that might not come at the first thought. So that might be my first thinking.
Great, thank you, Sandra. Helen, did you have a comment? Yeah.
Yes, no, I just thought that Michelle's experience in Mali was extremely interesting in this regard, and about the equity, making sure that we have equitable approaches. And to me, this is an illustration of the fact that by including animals in our work, we are actually trying to become more equitable. It's now that we're not equitable because we are making some voices and some activities invisible, and people don't feel legitimate to talk about water, although they are users and they are important stakeholders in this framework. So I think we have a very powerful approach here of making our WASH interventions more equitable by integrating those new perspectives, those new actors. And what I really liked is what Michelle was pointing out as well, is that we are dealing with a reality that is extremely integrated. Village life is not about water in one side and livelihood in another. It's completely entangled, and we as actors working with WASH, we have to handle and tackle those deeply entangled problems and become more integrated ourselves to mirror this profoundly integrated practices and life. So that is, for me, the best way to make sure that we keep this equity at the heart of whatever we do, making sure that every existence is listened to and talked about and given voice in our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a question here from Ayushi, and thank you for the enlightening webinar. How can we encourage national governments to extend the scope of WASH to include animals or animal health? Does anyone have experience with this already or perspectives to share? Or if not national, maybe other examples of policy integration that anyone has seen? Or is this is currently a gap or a challenge for this issue?
I could speak briefly on that, but I know that Linus has been working on policy advocacy as well, and also you, Sarah. But I'm just to give you an example of how this came up as in a discussion. We at SIWI, we work together with governments to improve the way they build their capacity to become more resilient to climate change. And during the discussions, it always happens that someone comes up with the issue of access, of animal access, livestock access to water, sharing water in multi-use schemes, etc. And very often that is one way. I mean, being aware and giving this having this visibility of giving attention to those questions that are present in the field, but never in policies or in writing at the higher level, is we as development professionals, as Sandra was saying, we have a role to play in bringing those, making sure that these issues are not forgotten, making sure that if it has been picked by participants in a workshop, that it gets higher up and given more attention. So that's one way we at SIWI work, being aware and making sure that those issues are always put in action plans and whatever results we have.
Go ahead, Linus. I think you have the last minute, maybe.
I could just say that I think integrating animal risks is really on the agenda in both many countries, and also WHO is highlighting the need to integrate animal risks, but there's rarely the focus on strengthening animal health, preventing animals from falling ill, which maybe doesn't fall on the WASH professionals, but it's the other side of the coin. How can we keep healthy animals? It will also have repercussions on human health and livelihoods, etc. So maybe the animal health part of it is something that we cannot do ourselves, but need to work very closely with veterinaries and livestock specialists as well. So that it's this creating these opportunities to collaborate would be super important.
Thank you, Linus. And I think from the global policy perspective, there's been a recent push for engagement on the topic of climate change and WASH. And I think maybe also on the issue of biodiversity is somewhere where the WASH sector hasn't really taken advantage of possible opportunities there to also engage. So maybe that's something, a future gap. But then the flip side of that is also, I think the WASH sector does have lessons also for the broader One Health community, particularly around issues around equity and gender and how to engage in gender transformative approaches. So I think it's not just one direction. There's also two direction opportunities for sharing. I realize we're at the end of our time, so I just want to first of all thank all of the conveners of this webinar. So SuSanA, GIZ, SIWI, and all of the speakers who've joined us today to share their perspective. So just a final reminder that the policy brief that's being launched today is available now for you to take a look at. So please take a look and also share with your colleagues. And I just like to thank everyone for joining today and your participation. There's also a survey if you'd like to give your comments. So thank you again.
Thank you.